Band on the Run was Paul McCartney's best-selling post-Beatles album and was a turning point in the career of the band Wings, as it was well received by both the fans and critics alike. Recording of the album was to get underway in the autumn of 1973 and to try and escape from the ongoing legal battle with the Beatles and the normality of daily life. Paul and Linda wanted more of an experience when recording the album and proceeded to search locations of the EMI studios dotted across the world. At this point, EMI had studios all over the globe, each equipped with standardised gear, so any EMI engineer could expect to find the same or a similar setup, even when visiting one of their studios in a different country. In the end, the pair decided on Lagos, Nigeria, with the idea being that it sounded like something might happen there, which proved to be accurately prophetic. One of the biggest hiccups came the day before they left, as drummer Denny Sywell decided this adventure wasn't for him and left the band. This was just a week after guitarist Henry McCulloch, following an argument during rehearsals at the McCartney's farm in Scotland, left also. Undeterred, the remaining members of the band decided to go ahead with the recording, with Paul taking the role as drummer. An advance party of the only other remaining band member, Danny Lane, and engineer for the album, Jeff Emerick, left a few days before Paul and Linda. Jeff shared his experience of arriving at the studio in his book, Here, There and Everywhere. His first impression of the actual studio wasn't all that bad, as he recognised the desk as a smaller version of the one they had at Abbey Road, and the exact same monitor speakers. The Studer tape machine was an older 8-track machine as opposed to the 16 they were used to by then, but it would be fine for their needs. His confidence dipped a bit though, when he was told that only 4 tracks of the tape machine could be monitored when recording. This meant that overdubbing became severely compromised. It had never really been a problem for the 2 in-house engineers, who were named Odeon and Monday, as they only ever recorded bands playing live. When Jeff asked to see the microphone cabinet, he was instead presented with a box containing a random collection of inexpensive old microphones, although he was enthused to see a couple of quality Neumann mics in there, which would give them some good options. The studio space itself was quite a bit different from what they were used to also, with no isolation booths or any dividers at all. The studio were keen to provide what Jeff needed though, as they got to work creating separation panels, with even Paul and the band sawing pieces of wood for the carpenters to assemble. After ironing out these issues, the band then got to work laying down the tracks for Mamunia, which was the first song they recorded in Lagos. This coincided with a huge tropical rainstorm. For the next 3 weeks, they worked Monday to Friday in the studio, and at weekends went out to take in a bit of the local culture, including watching local bands. Paul was keen to interact and maybe even invite some musicians down to the studio, although this plan was quickly stopped when fellow Ransom Kuti told Paul that he wasn't happy with him coming over to steal their music. Paul tried to reassure him that this wasn't the case, but Fella even aired his grievance on the radio. Fella was eventually invited to the studio to hear for himself what they were doing, at which point he stopped his campaign. In fact, the only African musician to appear on the album was Remy Kabaka, who was performing bongos on Bluebird. They actually met in London, and only later found out he was originally from Lagos, which was a pure coincidence. The initial rhythm track for Bluebird is interesting in the fact that it features an early drum machine, the Rhythm Ace, to carry the gentle melody along.
Listen, for anyone who doesn't know what a rhythm box is, it's this little thing you can get in the shop, you plug it in your wall, and you hit a button. It sounds like that.
Another brush with the locals nearly proved much more deadly though, as they were held at knife point. Late one evening, a car pulled up to Paul and Linda when they were walking home from a night out. After they admitted to being tourists, 5 men emerged from the car and demanded their belongings, which included jewellery and money, but also a bag containing the demo tapes for the album. As far as we know, these tapes have never resurfaced, but it would definitely make an interesting listen should they ever show up again. Paul recalls that he remembered the songs well enough not to need the demos particularly. Songs like Picasso's Last Words were written some time before. This song came about by being challenged to write a song about any given random subject. They plucked an article from the newspaper that supposedly contained Picasso's last words, "Drink to me, drink to my health," and Paul went about playing and singing the first thing that came to him. Not only a great party trick, but a nice song for the album also. The songs actually ended up being recorded in different studios in Lagos, as this was laid down at Ginger Baker's studio that was nearby. Mistakenly, Ginger was under the impression that McCartney was intending to record at his studio all along, but that was never the case. He did join in the session though, playing some percussion. The title track's theme of being on the run was a reference to many bands being hounded for marijuana possession at the time, including his. Other songs such as Hell on Wheels Mrs. Vanderbilt, and Let Me Roll It were all fairly well constructed also, so it was a matter of getting the right performance and feel for each. The initial recording was Paul on drums and Denny on guitar, followed by overdubs of more guitars, with leads also being shared by Denny and Paul, plus Linda's keyboards. At least some bass was also recorded, as seen here, with Paul playing his Fender jazz bass. Although the drama surrounding the recordings didn't abate, as in the middle of recording a vocal one day, Paul suddenly collapsed into an unconscious heap. Linda thought he was having a heart attack, and was understandably panicked by the sight. The engineers were swift to arrange a quick dash to the hospital, where on the way, Paul came to, surprised that 1 minute he was singing in the studio, and next in a speeding car. Thankfully for all, it wasn't a heart attack, but a bronchial spasm, believed to be caused by too much smoking. Although a relief, Paul was still ill for some days, and quite frightened by the whole experience. Against all odds, the Lagos sessions comprised almost 2/3 of the whole recording process for Band on the Run, with 7 songs being recorded there. The 8-track tapes were then taken back to the UK and to George Martin's Air Studio for transfer to 16-track, in order to perform further overdubs and complete the rest of the songs. One of the big songs that hadn't been recorded yet was Jet. This high-tempo hit was actually fraught with its own technical difficulties, despite being recorded in a state-of-the-art studio. After a whole day of recording the song with many parts being layered, the engineers noticed that the tape was shedding. This is when the ferrous material starts to come away from the plastic back of the tape itself. Engineer Jeff Emmerich had a decision to make, whether to let the session continue, which at this point was in high creative spirits, or halt everything to perform a backup of the recording before proceeding. He chose to let it go on, but in the end it went on much longer than he anticipated. When they finished, he said he could almost see through the tape onto the plastic, with very little ferrous material left. Of course, this tape was very hastily backed up, but a good part of the sonic character of Jet is down to this degradation. The track is also characterised by the sound of the synthesizer. They would make their first appearance on Red Rose Speedway, but they are much more prominent on Band on the Run. In pictures, it appears Linda is using a Moog Model D, and she definitely used it in live performances. And synthesizer sounds are used throughout the album, and they could have been using the ARP Odyssey at some stage as well. Here is my approximation for the lead sound for Jet using the Behringer Model D. And the bass sound appears to be the same, except tuned down an octave. There was no presets in those days, so I imagine a lot of the sounds were easy to navigate from one to the next, especially in regards to playing live. After the final tracks were added, including 1985 and No Words, attention turned to orchestral overdubs, with Paul working with Tony Visconti on creating these parts that were crucial to tracks such as the finale of 1985 and the title track. Paul was a big fan of Visconti's orchestration work with T-Rex and invited him onto the sessions because of this. Apparently George Martin was a little bit upset about this, as he expected to be working with Paul on these aspects of the production, as he had with the James Bond theme Live and Let Die. Paul roped in his old mate from Liverpool, Howie Casey, to play sax solo on Bluebird, which he performed brilliantly in a single take, and with that the recording was finished. It was now up to Jeff Emmerich to complete the mixes, which he did in 3 days at Kingsway Recorders, due to Air Studios being booked out at the time. The album was released on the 30th of November 1973, and the critics were impressed, with the NME's Sar Murray saying, "The ex-Beatle least likely to re-establish his credibility and lead the field has pulled it off, with a positive masterstroke of an album entitled Band on the Run." In addition to praising McCartney for using synthesizers like an instrument and not like an electric whoopee cushion, Murray concluded, "Band on the Run is a great album. If anyone ever puts down McCartney in your presence, bust him in the snoot and play him this. He will thank you for it afterwards." Sales were slow at first, but the singles Jet and Band on the Run were big sellers, and catapulted the album to the top of the charts in the UK and the US. Against all odds, Jeff Emmerich received a Grammy for Best Engineered Album, and sums up the recording perfectly. To this day, I don't quite know how we did it. It's now considered somewhat of a landmark recording. I'm convinced that it wouldn't have sounded any better if we had done it entirely in a state-of-the-art London studio, all of which goes to show in the end, it's the music that really counts.
Okay, chaps.